Okay. This is not the talk I was planning on giving this morning. The talk I was planning on giving this morning isn't going to be done in time, so it's going to be done this afternoon. But there was nothing in the slot, so I panicked. Uh, so forgive this for being a little rough around the edges, and feel free to unmute now and again and make noises, because I personally find it terrifying to talk to myself in a silent room. So yeah, and ping with questions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so text justification. I've fooled you all. This is a technical talk, but the first half is not going to be technical at all. We're going to be talking about history and art and stuff. Haha. You're all trapped. You cannot close this meeting. So let's roll back to Gutenberg and the first like European typeset book that was successful. And a question you could ask is, why was it successful? Because it turns out at the time, like, Gutenberg was not the only person who was working on Google Type. That's not that crazy an innovation. People recognized that a printing press would be a good thing, would be a possible thing. The challenge was execution. And some of that was technical, but a lot of it was also visual. Gutenberg had to prove that what he produced wasn't just cheaper and faster, but was also just as good as a handwritten in Kunabula. So he did this. There we go. Which is sort of still considered one of the stunning achievements of typesetting, even now, despite the fact that it was the first achievement of typesetting. So what are notable things about it? What makes this really great? One of the things, and the thing most important to us right now, is that the first impression of the page is of two very clean, clearly designed rectangles. The canon of the page is very clear. The proportions of the margins, how it all lays out, obvious. And those two rectangles, if you sort of squint your eyes, they are what typographers would call an even gray. There aren't any big gaps. There aren't any extra dense sections. Overall, they give the same sensory impression. Looking closer, if you look at the punctuation that occurs at the end of lines, that punctuation sits outside of the rectangle, because a period, for instance, is quite a small spot of ink relative to a letter. And so to give that sense of being a rectangle, we use Gutenberg hung the punctuation. There's a hanging punctuation, dangling punctuation, something like that, to give that consistent line on both sides of the text. Unfortunately, Gutenberg also used a lot of abbreviations and shorthands and longhand and variations on letter types. He did all kinds of crazy work to get the text to look really great. It actually made the text much harder to read because words were abbreviated in that way. But so we have to, in future times where we want people to read what we write, we have to be a little more careful than Gutenberg was. But this is the goal: one or two lovely rectangles, very clear, very even, no big gaps. That's where we're headed. So I'm going to talk about how to do this technically in the abstract, and then I'm going to jump to how to do it specifically on the web, on the front end. The algorithm we're going to be talking about is called Knuth and Class. The Knuth in Knuth and Class is Donald Knuth, who is famous for many, many things, but in part because he set out to write a series of textbooks on computer science, did not like any of the typesetting available, and wrote his own typesetting engine in order to typeset his books. It's one of the greatest yak shaves that's ever been successfully shaved, I guess. But the Knuth and Class algorithm starts by saying, let's break these words into syllables. Where are all the places we can put a hyphen if we want to hyphenate a line? Then take each of those syllables and measure it. How wide is it? How much space does it need to take up? And similarly, note each of the breaks in between words and syllables. So we're going to walk through all of these, and we're going to note when a break is a hyphen, because we'd rather not break on a hyphen. We can, but we'd rather not. And now we're going to do dynamic programming. So we're going to start at the first possible break and say, how bad is it if we break the line there? And the answer is math. The answer is do some math. This is roughly the mean squared error, but with some complications. Here, compression is take the difference between the line length we want and the sum of the syllables we've accumulated so far in the line, and then divide by the number of breaks we have available, the number of gaps we have available. So this is saying, how big do you have to make your space to make this line square up with all the others? If you have to stretch the words very, very far apart, that's bad. And it gets bad quickly. That's why we're squaring that. The penalty is basically, hey, are we going to hyphenate, or are we going to do one of another? Yeah, I mean, there are a handful of things that you try and avoid. Hyphenation being the biggest and most obvious, but you can add any penalty term here you want to say, I don't like this line, choose a different line. I don't like lines that end in the word the. You could add a penalty for that. And finally, the delta, which is saying, if I have one line where I have had to make the gaps very big, and then one line where I have had to actually shrink the spaces to fit all the words in, that's much more jarring than two lines where the gaps are quite large. And that goes back to, we want that sense of even gray. Whoops. I've stopped sharing. Can anybody hear me? Where are we?
You can still see your camera. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I hope to God that all that math made sense as I said it out loud, because perhaps you couldn't see it. Anyway, here is what I just said. Don't know when I stopped sharing. Isn't a remote conference just a grand thing? Okay. So now you've found all the costs of potential line breaks up through the point at which you can no longer cram all the syllables onto your first line, and now you're asking about your second line. To ask how bad is it if I break the second line here, you need to know which first line you're picking. And you can do that by running through all the possible first lines and calculating your cost for your second line and pick the lowest, right? We know we want some low cost for the combination of these first two lines. So rather than try every combination of possible line breaks for the whole paragraph, which is very expensive, we're going to keep track of the best possible score for each position where you could break a line and sum what's best. That was a terrible description of dynamic programming, but I think you've got the general overview there, and you can go look up Knuth and Plas if you want real specifics. So before I jump to then how to take that abstract algorithm and do it specifically on the web, are there questions? Are there comments?
I'm tracking you.
Cool. 11. Okay, yeah, we're flying because I talk fast and I don't have that much to say. Doing it on the web. The first thing to note is that browsers don't do this. I don't have a complete explanation for why no browser does Knuth and Plas. They all fill lines greedily, which is just to say that they keep putting words on a line until there's no more room, and then they move on to the next line. Every space is the same width, even if, until you say justify, and then it just greedily fills and stretches the line. This is ugly, and it leads to what are called rivers, which is where you have a large gap on one line, and then a large gap in a similar place on the next line, and a large gap on the next line, and suddenly your eye gets trapped by this vertical gap when we should be seeing really only horizontal gaps. So the outcome of that is that designers tend to say, no, do not justify text. Web designers say, don't justify text. It's ugly. Which is weird because print designers consistently say, no, please justify text. It's the most beautiful way of presenting text. Every book you open, text is justified. So not justifying text on the web because browsers are bad at it is a bummer. That said, admittedly, browsers are trying to deal with every human language, going in every direction, and writing Knuth and Plas for Arabic. I don't know how to do it. I don't know what text justification for Arabic even looks like. Yeah, so there are potential reasons why a browser might refuse to do this, but if you're presenting English text on the web and you want it to look good, maybe you want to justify your text better than the browser can. So this is where I ran out of time. So you may be able to tell a slight difference in the language of the slides and how dense they are. The first problem with doing this on the web is that you don't know how big every syllable is. And in particular, you need to know how big a syllable is in the style that it's actually being displayed. And because of style sheet cascading, you don't know what style the text is going to be displayed in, except in its actual location in the DOM. So step one is take the block of text that has already been rendered, wrap every syllable in its own span, and measure each of those spans. This is already gross, and we're still chugging along in step one. You've now added 10,000 new DOM elements just to measure your syllables. Then you do Knuth and Plas to figure out where you would like your lines to break. That's fine. Now you have to undo the horrible syllable spans that you added and wrap each line in a span and add hyphens where necessary to the end of those lines. That's a crazy hard task because the line breaks that you've found are not necessarily nicely nested within the DOM tree of the text. The example here I give is, well, if you wrap a phrase in a strong tag or an italics tag or an emphasis tag, you may want to break your line first outside that tag and then inside that tag, and you can't just put a span around that. So you've got to recognize that fact, make two spans, one inside and one outside. And then you have to style each span with word spacing to increase that the size of the spaces in the span so that the line is the length you expect it to be. That used to be much harder because it used to be a number of browsers couldn't do sub-pixel spacing. They could only do add 1 pixel, add 2 pixels, like integer additional pixels per space, which is a big change. And during that period, you would have to make multiple spans for each line in an attempt to average the spans word spacing to be these sub-pixel spacing that you wanted. That's now mostly gone. All the mobile browsers and all the modern browsers now you can do fractional pixel spacing. So that at least is nicer. And then you have to remember to redo this whole process anytime someone resizes the window or otherwise the column of text changes. This also doesn't touch hugely on the problems of, okay, so I've got an image floating inside of the block of text. So the line length that I'm aiming for is different for every line. That's still possible to measure, but it's another complication in trying to do this on the web and trying to do it. Anyway, if you do all these things, then you can end up with this, which is a screenshot from my blog. And you can note that the punctuation is dangling on both sides. The spaces are basically the same size through all the lines. There's a typo in this block of text, and that's unfortunate. But otherwise, the look of it is very similar to that our original goal of Gutenberg-esque text justification. And then I guess the sales pitch is all of this has been wrapped up in an NPM package called Unjustifiable that you hand paragraph tags and it does this beauty for you. It's not perfect. There's a little flicker because it's a pretty expensive process. But if you want text that looks like it was typeset by a printer on the web, I wrote a package for you. And that's right about 11:20, so we got 5 minutes for questions if people have them. Let me see where, stop sharing my screen.
Sam, I think I've heard, that eCode is based on some HTML and stuff, and I imagine ebook readers do nice text justification. Is there any overlap with ebooks?
So some ebook readers don't. For a long time, Kindle did not. It was really frustrating. And some of that is just the expense of the calculation. Newth and Plass is better than testing everything, but because like if you're making an ebook reader, you want the battery to last a long time. You can ebook rendering, yes, absolutely. All the big typesetting software does this. It's just like the trickiness of my ebook reader is a different size than yours means like somebody who's typesetting a PDF can make it look really good. Somebody who's typesetting an ebook reader has to hope that the ebook reader itself is going to do a good job. And they're better than they were as low energy CPUs are more available. Thomas, can this package hide the text before it's ready for display? Kind of, sort of, but not, because it at least has to be in the DOM to measure. You can't do display none. That doesn't get painted, and it doesn't have a size, so you can't ask how big it is. You can do visibility hidden under some circumstances, but it doesn't work universally, so I don't do it. The package doesn't do it, but you can, if your particular setup allows for that, you can do that manually. You can say visibility hidden, do the thing. Once it's done, show.
How do you handle the syllabalization of the strings? Do you have a dictionary you work off of, or?
That is, so there are a couple I use I actually don't, in my package, I say, please include a hyphenation library and hand me a function that will hyphenate a word. But there are several hyphenation libraries out there. What they do is they actually have like this crazy map of syllable segments, and they score, here's where we think these words will be syllabalized. So they don't have a dictionary of words. They have a dictionary of like scored word fragments. And that syllabary is different for different languages. So like you can say, hey, I want to use Hyper.js and I only want it to know about English, and it'll have its little weird set of syllables. That's still a little bit magic to me, to be honest. I have no idea how to pick out what syllable fragments get what scores. Linguists know. The shadow knows.
Someone asked earlier in the comments, are there browser plugins available to do this?
No, not browser plugins, mostly because well, could there be? So I should correct that. I don't know that there are any. I would hesitate to write one for fear of like changing the number of lines of text or the width of text that breaks a page. But also because almost nowhere on the web on the web that's pretty do you see justified text at all. So like a browser plugin that was looking for CSS justified text to try and make prettier mostly wouldn't find any. And justifying text that's unjustified to begin with can look really weird. If the designer wasn't planning on you knowing where the right edge was down to the pixel, it can look hairy. Stephen asked what the URL for my blog is. I posted it in the programming room on Teams. It's also sambleckley.com. It's not hard to guess, but. Cool, that's 11:25. Everybody go away. Thank you all for listening.